Okay, it helps if I unmute myself before I start talking to the wide world here. Um, weird streaming setup today, so it's going to be a little weird setup mode here because we didn't have our transition screen set up. So I'm going to need folks to confirm in chat that you can hear me, that you can see me, all that kind of stuff. Um, okay, yeah, it looks like we're good. Okay, all right. Let's dive into it. Welcome to Ash Office Hours. Very shortly here, we're going to transition over to the group sort of streaming mode with the rest of the core team members. The purpose of this is essentially for us to give you a little bit of update about what's going on in Ash Land, and then for you guys to ask us questions. So I'm going to, like I said, the streaming setup's not sort of fully set up. So I'm going to switch over to the Discord thing, and then I'm going to have to figure out how to get my face on it. So let's make this happen. All right, say hi everybody. Wave to the world.
Hi, everybody.
All right, and now I'm going to have to add my video. If I turn on my camera. Yeah, okay, no, this works great. And the only small problem is the spacing here, which I don't know how to fix because OBS, by the way, the tool you use to stream, is insanely complicated. All right, it just is what it is. Oh, here's what I can do. I can slim chat down a little bit so it's not over. Okay, there we go. This will do. Transition. All right. Okay. Okay, that's the marathon. For folks who aren't aware, I'm actually like pretty sick. So if I sound weird, etc., that's why. To kick things off, we're gonna go through our sort of our new little tradition, which is I'm just going to go through the Ash Weekly posts and talk about what's happened since the last office hours. What would help is me remembering when the last office hours was. Let's see. It would have been, well, it would have been in April. I know that much. But what day in April was it? So I know which newsletters to read. Screw it. I'll just go back. Okay. Um, yeah. Well, the first one, we had a relatively quiet week for the first time in a very long time, a couple weeks ago. We one thing I'd like to talk about is we're looking to have you folks, you fine folks out in the world, come and present at the Ash Office Hours meetings. So we're thinking maybe it could be anywhere from 5 minutes, 10 minutes. We'd also be willing to do up to 2025. Which is just there's two themes we're looking for if you're interested, which is Ash in production. So these are success stories, cautionary tales, learning by doing, that sort of thing, as well as Ash in the lab. So that's tinkering with new ideas, trying things out, experimentation. And we're gonna keep all submissions around. So even if we don't select yours, first or anything like that, the concept is we just want to have sort of stuff on deck that we can share. And just get, I guess, more exposure from other people that aren't our team, and give you a chance to share with the world what you're doing. Another update is I'll be speaking at a couple non-Elixir conferences, and this is something that as a community we're looking to increase. Right, it's not just for me, but Elixir in general is a little underrepresented out in the conference circuit, out in the wild. And so I'll be spending a bit of my time and focus working on that, as will others. Moving on to issue number 15. Okay, this is where things started getting quick. From here on, it's basically an avalanche of stuff that has been going on in this last month. It has been an absolutely wild month. Tidewave was released, and we did some testing and some improvements around how Tidewave actually works with Ash. For folks who aren't familiar, Tidewave is what's called an MCP server. And an MCP server's job is to basically give your local coding agent, whatever that looks like for you, if you Cursor or Zed or Claude Code or whatever, it's designed to give it new tools in its toolbox. And Tidewave, I think, is a really cool take on it, something that really changes the game. And we added some tools for working a little bit better with Tidewave. And there's these high level info functions that the agent can call inside of your app to get information about what's going on. So it's quite cool. Let's see. Yeah, we did some work this is a backwards compatible configuration, so you need to opt in. But one of the things that was quite interesting is when we switched AshJSON API and Ash GraphQL to use bulk update and destroy actions for their update and destroy endpoints, like the patch and delete endpoints. One of the things we actually got wrong about that is it would eagerly respond with a 404 not found. Basically, the concept is that, and we do this often with errors, which is when you can't read something, we say, well, we couldn't find it, right? It's what Bash policies always are filtering, right? But for updates, you actually do have a different kind of expectation around those things works. Typically, an update says, no, you can't do that, right? So when you combine them into a bulk update, there's actually like 4 different sort of ways you could think about it, right? Like you could have, if you can't read it and you can't, or you can't update it, right? Both of those are a 404. If you could read it, but you can't update, right? Like this sort of thing. It gets a little complicated, and we just opted for something a little bit better in recent versions. Go check the newsletters for this stuff, or the documentation for this stuff, changelogs. But now basically, if you can't read it, it's a 404, and if you can't update it, it's a 403. You're not allowed to update this thing, which is just much more expected from API callers. Inertia support for Ash errors. So Inertia.js is a pretty exciting and interesting technology. There's a Phoenix and Inertia adapter. And the only thing we really had to do to make Ash play nicely with all that tooling is make a way for our errors to be displayed across Inertia. I know I'm talking a lot of high level stuff here. Just you're going to have to go look up what Inertia is. It's a whole conference talk to go through all that content. But if you're interested in using React with Elixir, and you're interested in not having to opt into like this crazy complexity mess that is most React front ends, Inertia might be a good choice for you. And we've done some exploration at Alembic actually of this. You can find some talks from Mike Buho, who works with us, about his findings working with Inertia. So check that stuff out. Igniter spreading its tendrils further out into the world. Tidewave and Inertia. So Tidewave has an Igniter installer, which is very useful. I've used it like 6 times already. And Inertia has one that's still in PR, but I think it's going to be a really big deal because it's going to be basically the only on-ramp I know of to getting a fresh Elixir application with React set up. Like, there is no way to do that right now. No, like, open source, simple installer button. There's a lot of like starter kits where it's like somebody's opinions. So I'm really excited about this. I really hope we can get that PR over the line. And then we're going to put it up on Ash HQ, and now people can make an Ash app with LiveView, or they can make an Ash app with Inertia, which I think that freedom of choice is really important. And we want to kind of embrace our React loving friends out in the world and not make them feel like they're idiots for wanting to write JavaScript, right? Which I think happens every once in a while in this crew. Okay, on to the next newsletter. God, there's so much that's happening. I'm going to be talking forever. Let me try to move quick through this. I went to Gig City Elixir. I'm not going to recap all the talks here, but you can check out the newsletter for some great talks. I will just throw a shout out to Sasha Urich's talk, which was insanely amazing. Probably one of the best things I've ever seen. Got a standing ovation at a tech conference. Never seen that happen before either. Okay, we have a new extension called Ash Events, which is it brings first-class event sourcing capabilities to your application. It's unique. It's interesting. If you want to find out what makes it unique, you can go read the debate about it on Elixir Forum, because there's a lot of people who have opinions about whether it qualifies as event sourcing. Pro tip: it does. They're wrong. But they have interesting points, and it's a nuanced and interesting conversation. Additionally, domain modeling with Ash framework. There's a new book. There's a second Ash book out in the world. Which I had no idea was going to happen. Sorry about my dogs. But very cool stuff. Very exciting. Go check it out. The homepage is at devcarrots.com. So you can pick up a copy. I think it's a great compliment to Rebecca in my book, personally. It's a very different angle, right? You're not going to feel like you've just you're just reading a similar book, I think, yeah, it's a really cool thing. Combination queries. Go look that up in the docs. I'm not gonna. It's complicated to even explain what they're for. The short summary is, if you're familiar with what union and union all and intersect stuff is in SQL, it's that. And if you're not familiar with what those things are, then you're gonna have to go look it up yourself. Finally, last one, issue number 17, just came out the other day. Yesterday? I don't know. We launched Ash AI, so that's very exciting. I know a lot of people were waiting for this. And I'm sure that'll come up in this office hours today. It's got a lot of stuff in it. It's got MCP servers, structured outputs, a chat interface generator, so you can get a live view that that gives you AI chat in your app. We've got vectorization, so you can like store the various parts of your application as like searchable vector embeddings, like all sorts of cool stuff. So go check out the announcement for that as well. You can search like Ash AI announcement. I don't know, you'll probably find it. Big buzz in the Elixir community is Phoenix.new, which is pretty interesting. I won't break it all down. I think you should, if you're interested in this conversation, you may consider reading the most recent issue of Ash Weekly. There's a lot of nuance here. We all want to be friends. We all want to stay friends. And I think we should try to, see things from everybody's point of view. What else we got? I think that is enough, and it's about all that I can get through on my current level of being sickness, whatever that is called. Health. I don't know. As you can tell, I'm sick. Let's move on. All right. To the rest of the core team, let's maybe have James go first. You want to talk about what you've been working on, and a friendly reminder to everybody that not every people work different schedules. A lot of times that this is that it's not their day job, etc. So they might talk about what they're working on in their day job, or they might talk about what they're working on in their off hours when they get a chance, right? So just some context there. James, what's going on?
So what is going on? Okay, so I've been well, the first thing is I've had a talk accepted to Goatmire to the NervesConf EU portion of Goatmire. So I'll be in Sweden in September presenting a talk about Reactor inside Nerves, which is pretty interesting. And it's fun because there's some mayhem that you can have. I've been working on, and it will be ready hopefully in the next 1 or 2 weeks, an extension that allows you to use Hammer, which is an excellent library from the Elixir community, to rate limit calls to actions. So your Ash actions, you can say, hey, I want, you can run my search action, for example, but you can't smash it 1,000 times a second because that's going to kill my database. So that's also really important from a security point of view. There's some things, especially inside Ash authentication, that you might want to have the ability to say, well, you can't register from the same IP address 10,000 times a second, for example. And so there's going to be more coming from that as we integrate that across. I think that'll get integrated across a lot of different extensions. What else have I been doing? Mostly I've been arguing with AI agents and going, no, that's wrong. But at least I'm trying, whereas I've refused to since the beginning.
Righty.
That's me.
I mean, you might have been right all along. We'll see. Cool.
It's just a great way for Cunningham law. You just need someone to tell you what's wrong so that you can tell them what's right.
Yeah, I definitely think they're good creativity machines. Like they solve a lot of the blank page problem, even if they put something totally incorrect. Like that helps me with writing documentation too. Like I asked it to write a guide on something, and I was like, that is so wrong. But just thinking of, like you said, Cunningham's law, thinking about how wrong it was like, well, here, told me how it actually should look. So it's interesting, the weird like white noise code generators that somehow are useful sometimes.
Well, I was playing around with the one in Z, and I opened up a project that is half an Elixir project and half a Rust project because it uses Rustler. And I said, tell me about this project. And it went away and read all the code. And about 2 minutes later, it came back and said, this is what this project does. And it was right. And I said, cool, put that in the README. And it did. And I'm like, okay, well, that justifies the amount of time that I've spent on it today. So there you go.
I definitely think the biggest way, like the thing you have to kind of grasp with the AI tech is like it can and will waste tons of your time. However, the trick is not necessarily to say because it could waste a lot of my time, I'm not going to use any of it. I mean, which you're free to, right? Like we don't want to. It doesn't matter, right? There's no like judgment here, but if you're interested, it's learning to get a sense of when it would can be value and when it won't be valuable, right? And so now, like as you build that up, as you try things, as you realize, nope, that was a waste of time, you start to get an idea of like, okay, actually this is super helpful. And a good example is like writing a bunch of permutations of the same test. Super useful, right? I'm like, I write an action and even this even works for an Ash app, right? Because I give it my own example of a test, even though it doesn't really know what to do. And I'm like, okay, write a bunch of like reasonable test cases for this action that follow this pattern for this test, right? And it'll spit out like 10 tests and I'll review them. I'll say, okay, yeah, so it's trying with this number negative now, right? That's a good test to have, right? And it's trying with that sort of stuff. So once you get a reflex for where this stuff is actually useful, I think it can be pretty powerful. Robert, you're back after a little bit of a hiatus. Do you want to just say hi? Tell us,
Yeah.
what's up?
Hey everyone. Yeah, I'm back. Hopefully, I was working in Elixir and Ash every day for about 18 months, and then switched jobs, and have been working a Rails job for the last 6 months, which is let's just say I'm trying to find more ways to work Elixir back into my life. So what I've been doing to scratch that itch is I've been helping out a friend who has a Shopify app, and that Shopify app was in Rails, and I've been moving parts of it over to Elixir and Ash. And there hasn't been a lot of interesting bits. It's been using just a lot of the Ash out of the box stuff. But the thing that I have gotten into is wrapping all the Shopify APIs as Ash resources and using some of the manual action stuff and just kind of, trying to interface with Shopify and their GraphQL and REST APIs in kind of a way that just feels like a little bit more sane to me. I will admit I'm spending way too much time on a Shopify app that is not mine, refactoring it. But helping out a couple friends, and it's been fun to kind of get in there and do Ash, and also the previous app I was working on, which is still in production and exists. I'm just not there. Um, we were doing a lot of interesting Ash stuff, and now I'm kind of going back to the basics. So, like, I previously had never used the Ash authentication. We had kind of rolled our own. So now I'm using that. There's kind of a number of things that were in Ash that I didn't use the first time around that I'm using the second time around. So it's been interesting. And, it's Shopify is terrible to work with. Anybody who's worked with that, it's just so convoluted, but kind of enjoying working with Ash again and getting to wrap stuff and put PRs up and that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's it for me. Trying to get more engaged in Ash now that I got a little bit more free time.
I just realized I was muted, and I think that means whatever I was just saying didn't go through. I don't know, but glad to have you back. And this is something you guys will see. This is something I want to encourage a lot in open source, right? Is to remember, like, this is all volunteer work, and like you come and go as you please. There's not expectations placed on you, like sort of onerous expectations just because you make a couple PRs. Like, I'm talking to the people not on the core team right now, but like you can come and contribute, you can drive by, contribute, all that sort of stuff.
So there are onerous expectations of us. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I expect regular blood sacrifices, actually. No. Anyway, my point is, I just want to encourage people to contribute and understand that, like, this is like I don't know, we're all long-term family here, right? So, anyway, before Rebecca goes, I'm just going to remind everybody that you can pre-feed us with some questions so that we can get right into questions after we do our little sort of intros. And often what happens is we finish our talks about what's going on in the world, and then we sit around for 2 to 3 minutes while people think of questions to ask. So just letting you know, put them up there. And if there aren't questions for any meaningful period of time, we will end this meeting. All right, Rebecca, tell us what's going on.
Yeah, sure. So last office hours was when you updated saying that our book was too long. So I've been spending the last couple of weeks trimming little bits of the book down to get it under the page limit. So we released the next beta of the book. So if you haven't checked out beta 5, it includes chapters 9 and 10, which is all about like following and unfollowing and PubSub, real time, bulk actions, all kinds of fun stuff. So that's been released. The book is now content complete, and we are moving into the next phase, which is the production phase. So that will start very soon. So we're going to be heading into print. So if you have any issues with the book, please let us know very, very soon, or it's going to end up in print. So that's really exciting. That's been a lot of work to get over the line, but we are almost there. And thank you to everyone who has read it. Thank you to everyone who has provided feedback, bug reports, all of that kind of stuff. It all makes the book much better because we miss parts because we're so close to it every day. So everyone's feedback is invaluable. Apart from the book stuff, I've also recently started working on an extension for Ash authentication to provide two-factor support. So you'll be able to set up two-factor TOTP stuff and have that working. It's only very preliminary at the moment, but James is helping me out on that. So that's in progress. I'm hoping to finish that in the next couple of weeks, but if I don't, then James will finish it off once I move on to other things. And that's about it for me. Most of it has been book stuff, but that is wrapping up now, so I will have more brain space to start looking at other things, hopefully, which is exciting.
Yes, I do want to say I have been excited for like over a year now at the prospect of Rebecca having time to do other stuff, because she's spent the better part of a year. She was already a subject matter expert in before starting the book, right? But if you think about what happens when you write a book, like it's I don't know, now all I'm like is we have this like superpower, this like nuclear weapon of an Ash user that has been spent the last hour or last year and a half working on the book, and I'm like, what's gonna happen when she's done, right? Which, to be clear, she's gonna take a break. She's gonna take a well-earned break. That's what's gonna happen first. So I'm just saying, I've heard some of her ideas and some of her plans, and I'm excited. I did want to say one other thing about what's been going on. If you've seen some of the recent stuff, we've been pushing some LLM related features to various packages, and this is something that's not that I'm kind of doing the initial experimentation on, but the goal is not for this to be an Ash convention. It's actually something that we want to be an Elixir convention, and this came out of the Elixir Contributors Summit, which I think you'll be reading about at some point soon. I think there's going to be some stuff put out about this, but ultimately we want to find a way to sort of democratize.
Maybe you can explain what the Elixir Contributor Summit was.
Yes, I will do my best. I don't want to like mischaracterize. It's basically it was an invite event at ElixirConf EU. It was the day after ElixirConf EU for a wide variety of people, but the concept was to get people who have, I would say, if I had to describe this again, I wasn't part of the selection criteria for people to get invites, but it was people who have invested significant amounts of time and money and are like leading important. So there's always there's one person from a lot of different areas that was representing different things. Josh from Alembic, our boss, James, Rebecca and my runs the Alembic. Anyway, he was there representing Alembic. I was there representing Ash. There were some other folks there representing, other sort of agencies and other libraries and frameworks and ecosystems and that sort of thing. And the concept was we didn't really know exactly what was going to happen, actually, but what it turned out being was, I think, quite useful, which is a little bit of a mix of coming up with some tangible improvements, things that we can do to help with Elixir adoption, to help the Elixir community with today's issues, right, of which AI is a big one of them, right? Like we talked about a lot of different things on that front, the merits of it, how should we do anything as a community and as a team, like should the Elixir team have a stance, all these sorts of things that we talked about. But another big proponent, just you see me doing a lot of AI stuff. That was only one small portion of what was actually discussed, and I want to make that like super clear. We had a lot of discussions around improving Elixir adoption, training, and learning, how we sell to larger organizations, how we explain Elixir, how we position it. A lot of these different things were the focus of various discussion groups and that sort of thing. It was a very productive meeting. I think it was great. I think the biggest thing that came out of it was just some level setting, like of a lot of different people understanding what other people care about, what they've been working, like what they're working on, what they're working towards. Very useful event, I think, and I hope that they continue to do it. I hope I continue to be invited because it was very valuable. So as a result of that, though, we discussed that Elixir, there's a sense that Elixir is not very good at, or the LLMs are not very good at Elixir. Some people disagree. I think they're wrong. I think it is not very good at Elixir. I think it's pretty verifiably not as good at Elixir as it is at other things. But what we kind of discussed is how can we democratize a lot of these things, right? Because what we also found is it wasn't just Ash. It's like a lot of different tools or just newer versions of Phoenix, right? The LLMs don't know this stuff. It's not in the training set. And in general, you just can't rely on what's in the training data for an LLM for it to be useful, because that's the realm of hallucination and just, frankly, bullshit, right? Like it's just, that's not how you use them well, is treating them like a knowledge base, right? So typically what you do is you provide rules, you provide LLMs, TXT, context, docs, and all this sorts of stuff. And then you use it as a sort of translator of sorts, right? Like, so to dig through all this stuff that you've given them and give you something that looks a certain way, right? So, and I think we've all seen an example of how that can work. Give it 10 tests and say, write an 11th test, just like those, but with one small difference. It's going to nail it like every single time, right? They're quite good at that sort of thing. And so the idea is that Elixir packages could have a rules file. Each Elixir package could have a rules file. And then there could be, what we're going with for now is a mix task that you can run to gather the rules from a select packages that you want to use their rules for. And it will write them it'll just concat them into a markdown file in your project. And depending on what you use, if you use Cursor, if you use Zed or Claude Code or whatever, the file you actually want is different, right? So you have to figure that out. For Zed, it's .rules. And so basically, and I've seen this actually, like, we've just started the experimentation in the last day or two, so I don't want to, be too positive about it, but it seems like a pretty significant difference is my first read on this. And basically all I do is I say, hey, grab these Ash packages, put them in this markdown file. And all of a sudden it just does a better job. Like, not a perfect job, but a much better job. And regardless, I've said this on the newsletter and stuff, regardless of what you think of LLMs, we all have a vested interest in people who use LLMs doing a better job, like, because they make problems for us sometimes, especially people who are learning with LLMs. Often it can be problematic. So we want to help them if we can. Anyway, so you'll see some motion on that. We're still working it out. We're still working out the kinks, but preliminary experiments are positive, and hopefully this will help with people learning and people looking to, I guess, vibe code. I don't really like the word, but Okay, questions. We have some questions. Alan asks, do all of the official backends support the new data layer query function? Yes. Okay. Some context for this. Data layer query was added recently. It's released now. It's a top level function in Ash. It's called ash.datalayerQuery. The concept is sometimes there's a type of escape hatch where what we want to do is we want to get the data layer query, which in this case, if you're using Ash Postgres, that's an ecto query, corresponding to a read action with all of the logic from the whole read action applied, all of the calculations added, all of the filters for policies and authorization and all this sort of stuff added. And that was actually quite difficult, right? What you could do before is you could take a query and get the data layer query, but you couldn't get the query after all the action logic. That includes pagination, right? Like all the stuff had been added. You couldn't, there was no like thing to sort of insert into the flow and say, okay, now just give me that query, don't run it. So that's what we did. We added ash.datalayer query, which does exactly that. It runs all the before hooks, it runs sort of everything, and then it gives you back a map of some information. Like here's what here's a function you can call to run it if you want to do the rest of the stuff, including after action hooks. And here's I can't remember all the stuff. Here's a load statement to apply if you want to load the non-calculation type stuff. So there, it's a little bit of some complexity there, but a very useful escape hatch. The question is, does that support all official backends? I mean, the answer is yes, it does, because it uses all the same stuff for query building that we use. It may or may not be more or less useful depending on the backend you use. Like the ETS data layer in Ash, for example, just puts all of the things into a struct and then does some stuff with it later. So it's not like an ecto query where there's some other way that you can run it that will be useful. But yes, they do. Next question. Any plans to provide LLM-friendly documentation for Ash? The dichotomy between AI tools crushing UI component changes and failing utterly to make backend changes is a bit sad. Yeah, I think we just kind of covered that, actually. I think the rules concepts covers it. A little, insider tip, but maybe folks aren't aware of this, but they're working on Markdown presentation layer for XDoc for Elixir documentation. And one of the big reasons that a lot of people want that is because you're not going to waste any tokens, right? Markdown's a very condensed format, which is very good for feeding into LLMs, and it backs up a sort of LLMs.txt. And what you can do is there's a thing called hex2text, like HEX number 2 TXT dot something or other. If you Google it, you'll find it. It's a way to get a hex package documentation as a Markdown file. And then you can drop that in for context if you want. The Ash documentation is massive though, and it will eat up all of your tokens, so good luck with that. But maybe it works for other packages. Last one in here. Okay, or so far, curious. Okay, YouTube is eating my comments. Curious to hear more about the ideas behind Ash Sync. Phoenix Sync is really cool, and I don't know if I have the brain energy to go into that whole sort of sphere of things, but it's essentially like an alternative stack in a way, right? Where you sort of hook your Postgres database up with a sync engine through to your front end. I like the tech and I like some of the new capabilities that you get with it. But as always, I have firm opinions about where domain logic should be routed and how it should live and how it should be defined and centralized in our sort of domain models. So Ash Sync's goal is essentially to give you a way to do that, to take an Ash action. And this is actually where ash.datalayer query sort of came from. I knew we needed it for other things. And when this came about, I had to be able to get the ecto query corresponding to an action with all policies applied. So I could give it to Electric SQL to run the ecto query to synchronize it to the front end. So honestly, there's a lot there. I would encourage you just to look into Electric SQL and see how it works. And you can kind of grok that we want to turn these into actions instead of just raw queries. Okay. How do policies fit in with the data layer query stuff? They are just applied. Like they are for any other query. Question. James, you can answer this one about DDD patterns. I don't know. Do you have the questions up, or do I need to?
Yeah, I've got them up. I'm reading it. If you want, it's kind of my answer. Like I've taken to putting the domain in the table name, so instead of it just being users, it's like accounts_users or whatever. In some of my projects, just to avoid that potential clashes in the future. But it depends on whether the juice is worth the squeeze for your particular project. I don't know that there's much value in particularly in having different schemas. We've got one client that has a bunch of different repos that they use for different domains, but mostly because they have different replication or sharding or whatever happening on them. So there's a bunch of reasons to use different repos, but yeah, I'm not sure if just because it's a different domain is a good enough reason.
Yeah, I think the thing I would tack on is you mentioned to avoid name conflicts, and that's one of those things where it's like you can avoid name conflicts with just different table names. The table name shouldn't really matter to your app, in fact, right? Like that's why we have the different, like a resource can map to whatever table under the hood. It can remap all the column names, so like the whole concept is that like you're not sort of just throwing your database up into the world. So you can, but one thing to keep in mind is like if you're just doing it for organization, it's just purely opinion. You do it if you want. But if you're trying to have like the same table in two different schemas, right? That like you can't easily like read all of the data and all of, you know what I mean? Like think it's so they're just basically different tables at the end of the day.
Joining?
Yeah, you can join across schemas. So
you can.
There's no significant cost to having tables in different schemas. Okay. How often do people use embedded resources? I'm finding them useful for describing and validating ephemeral data. Yeah, this is an interesting question. I'm curious to hear what the team thinks about using embedded resources before I say what I'm going to say.
I'm starting to use them more than I did before. Like when I was learning Ash, they weren't quite fully fleshed out. So it was like we didn't really use them a lot because they weren't fully functional. But now they're pretty fleshed out and they pretty work. So I'm starting to use them more. There's still a few quirks around them, I think. But they're pretty useful just for like where before we would put like just maps of stuff for like validating structures and types, and I think they're pretty good.
Yeah, I've used them extensively in the app that I was previously working on. So we had basically 4 kind of God models that were the main core of the app. And in those 4 models, we may have had like 30 to 40 different embedded resources because there were so many parts of them. And we did it for specific reasons. So I wouldn't just do embedded resources willy-nilly because they do create a lot of challenges. But in our case, you can think of the main models as being large configuration objects, and then all the embedded resources being like sub-configuration objects. And if you were to roll back one of them, you needed to roll back everything at once. So it was very easy to have it in one table. This is why I work so much on Ash Paper Trail, because we just constantly compound these changes into these, a single table with just so many embedded resources. But then we could roll it back quite easily and not have to worry about rolling back all the relationships. But it did have a lot of challenges. But once you got used to it, it was a pretty good tool to have in the toolbox.
Cool. Sounds like. So yeah, I mean, I think they're useful. I think they're nice. I think in some cases we've actually enriched other types now to cover some of the cases that embedded types cover. That I think when you have something really simple, they give you a little bit of a way out without having to sort of adopt some of the complexity of an embedded resource, which is like the map type and the keyword type. We even have a tuple type and a struct type, and all of those allow you to specify types for fields. And the sort of big difference is that you don't have like a sort of concept of like being an its own thing, right? So like when you look at an embedded resources, the biggest difference between an embedded resource and a map type with fields typed on it is that an embedded resource can have a primary key added to it, and you can actually have, when new attributes come in, they can be treated as an update to the existing embedded resource. So there's all these sort of capabilities that an embedded resource has that are not possible. And like if you have a list of embedded resources and you remove one, it actually will call a destroy action on that embedded resource
Yeah.
to where you can validate the ability to remove a thing from the list from inside the embedded action, for example, the embedded resource.
And apply policies.
Right. And you can have policies, you can have calculations. So there's a lot of useful things about embedded resources. But my only word of caution is that if you just want like a small composite attribute, right? Like if you've got like a telephone number, this is a horrible example, but you got a telephone number. Actually, it's not a horrible example. For whatever reason, instead of storing a telephone number as a string, you want to store it as like a struct with an area code and and like there's no concept of updating or validating really anything beyond can you make the struct, that sort of thing. Look in the struct types or the map types, right? So for those really simple cases, I think it's good to have options on this front, and not to try to shove everything in the same abstraction. So you can then select something more appropriate for what you're doing. Okay.
You'll get better error messages and error handling with like a live view if you're using the embedded resource, because you can specify more and you'll just get better error messages.
Yeah.
Also,
That makes
with an
perfect sense.
embedded
Yeah.
resource.
Because like a map is just like, hey, this thing's not valid, whereas like an embedded resource, it's like got a change set involved in an action and gets like more idiomatic errors. So yeah, smart. Next question. Has anyone spoken about using RLS, this is row level security, with Ash Postgres? Like, is there a hook to run a query before running the actual query? Okay, 2 thoughts. Main one, 3 thoughts. RLS is cool until it's not. It actually does have some like non-trivial performance implications. That's thought 1. Thought 2, we have discussed actually having a way to for cases where people want this to translate policies into row level security migrations. If there's, if we can sort of have a concept of like sort of retrofitting it, and this way we can actually tell you like, hey, these policies could fit in, and like you could potentially have a mix of some things that can be applied as row level security and some things that can't. I don't know if we're ever going to do it because policies just solve the case so well. Like they're like our own, like if you look at what policies actually are, like there's things whose entire reason for existence is doing what policies do. There's like Zanzibar and what have you that are like these crazy services and all that sort of stuff, and we sort of get that for free. But might happen. Yes, somebody can say something.
Well, the main thing about that is that it wouldn't be supported by any other data layer, whereas the policies are ubiquitous across everything, even runtime.
Yep. Yeah, good point. It's a Postgres only. Well, I don't know. Maybe there's other SQL, but it's like it's going to be some special sauce for any given data layer, right? What that actually sort of looks like.
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing is like for row level security to work, you have to have users in your database for every user that you're trying to, which is like only viable in a pretty strict subset of I don't know, stuff that you're doing. So the other thing is there a hook to run a query before running the actual query? That's called a before action hook, super common. And you can do one. You can make sure that the first before action hook sets the user in the database, like that sort of thing. So yes, you can do that if you want.
You can, in regards to Samuel's thing, but comment about embedded resources being basically resources without data layers. That's true. You can have resources without data layers also, and they're pretty much the same thing.
Yep.
One of the ways I've been doing API integrations is by doing resources with no data layers where every action has a manual implementation that wraps up a rec call, and that's working perfectly fine.
I like it. Conrad, I think you're getting at that you don't have to have a user in your database for any given user, because you can set some sort of session param indicating like what the user is, I think is what you're saying. I'm not actually 100% sure how all that works. I have not used row level security myself, kind of on purpose. It's just never really, like, if you have a properly formed application layer, like you have less limits on what you can scope for your users to do. And but I'm not like digging the I'm not saying, let's find it to do. And I think there could be like certain compliance and auditing cases where like you want to be able to say like with 100% certainty from the data level itself that like it's mathematically impossible for, and I think so there's a place for that sort of design pattern. But I wouldn't suggest it, for somebody who, it's one of those things, it's kind of like a NoSQL database, right? Like if you think you need one, you don't need one. Like you have to know that you need that thing. And then it's like, okay, now you can make that choice. All right, folks. We've got a little bit more time. Keep the questions coming.
Well, we've got a little bit of a breaking questions. You didn't mention in your update, Zach, that you got elected to the EEF, the Erlang Ecosystem Foundation. You didn't mention that. Like, that's awesome.
Right. I forgot about that. Sorry. Sick brain, I guess. I don't know. Yes. So I'm on the board of the Erlang Ecosystem Foundation as of the other day, which is very exciting. I'm excited about the foundation. I'm also part of one of the working groups for the foundation, which is libraries and frameworks. Big surprise, right? But our goal there is to provide tools and documentation and help for people who want to build libraries and frameworks in the Elixir or Erlang Beam ecosystem in general. And so, but yeah, I'm excited to see what I can do on the board, and it's got a lot of great people on it, as well. Other folks, Lee and Lars, who got elected. Go tell them all congrats. It's very exciting. A lot of Elixirists joining the club is what happened recently, so that's fun. Go sign up for the EEF. It's free. Just to be clear, you can be a free member, and you can join the Slack, and you can help sort of just see what's going on, add to the pulse if you want. There's also an option to be a voting member, which lets you vote on resolutions and what's happening within the EEF itself, which includes like many times how funds are spent, right? What projects get greenlit, all these sorts of things. And it's a very modest, I think $99 a year or something like that. So it's not super expensive, and that money goes back to the Elixir community, which supports everybody. So definitely thank you, Rebecca, for reminding me to plug the big, I completely forgot.
All good. I just wanted to mention it because that's awesome.
Yeah, and we already said it, but that Rebecca and James are going to be at. Well, did we say that you're going to be at Goatmeyer, Rebecca? I know we said James is going to be there, but
we're saying it now.
We're saying it now. everybody's going to be there. Come one, come all. It's going to be like the Ash convention. I've talked to so many people. There's a lot of Ash users going to Goatmeyer. I think I might even try to like set something up the day before, like at minimum like a happy hour or something. We can all have a little Ash throwdown, see what happens. But if you haven't got your tickets, you should get your tickets. It's going to be a really good time. And it's in the middle of nowhere, Sweden. And that sounds ridiculous, but everybody's going. I don't understand. I don't know how he did it, but
we're just going to take over the whole town with Elixir and developers.
But I think it's because it's in the middle of nowhere, Sweden,
right,
that we all want to go.
I think you're right. I think you are right. Okay. Yep. So I went with embedded resources over plain old resources without data layers because they are Ash types. You don't have to specify the presence or absence of a primary key. Yeah, that's fair. They work a little differently in general. But yeah, that's fair. Why is the domain required to generate a code interface? It's an interesting question, actually, and this was more obvious in 2.0 than 3.0. In 2.0, when domains were called APIs, you always called functions on the API itself. So it looked more like myapp.accounts.create, and then right, there was no Ash module with all of the functions in it. And so it was a little bit more clear that you actually always know two things when you do an action. I mean, you know a lot of things, but we always have the domain and the resource, and because there are rules that can be put onto the domain that govern like how all of the resources being used with them actually work. And it is not 100% guaranteed that every resource has exactly one domain, right? So we always have to know what the domain is. But in 3.0, we just made it way more ergonomic to where like the 99% of the time you don't know what domain, or like there's one domain configured for every resource and it's just never ambiguous, and that's totally fine. And so that's why it's a little bit less obvious that when you make an embedded resource and you try to define a code interface, that nothing happens until you define a domain. And we could probably detect that now, like throw like an error or something and say like, it's complicated. We could talk about it on Discord later. There's reasons why we don't necessarily do that. Maybe a warning. I don't know. But that's why, because we can't let you call actions without us knowing what the domain is that's in play. All right, y'all. We've got about 5 minutes left. That's a bug. So Samuel says Ash Phoenix will generate form for extensions on code interface specified on embedded resources without a domain, even though the code interfaces are not generated. It's not a serious bug, but it is a bug. Which is it shouldn't do that. It doesn't really hurt anything that it does. Because as far as I know, like when you actually try to create it, oh, you know what? Embedded resources, they have this like yeah, I might be able to improve this for embedded resources specifically, because there's this concept of like called it a shadow domain, which is actually like a hilarious and like ridiculous name. Does that still exist? Let me see. It does. Yeah, it does. Okay. So we could use this.
I suppose you didn't call it the upside down.
Right. All it is, okay. We could make it so embedded resources can have code interfaces, and we'll use that by default. The basic concept is there's this domain. It has this stupid name. It's just because you're never supposed to use it for anything. It's like internal to Ash only, that we use for working with embedded resources, because like you don't want to use any special rules from any given domain. They're just like treated like values, you know. So we could use that for code interfaces by default. If you want to open an issue or a proposal that basically says like embedded resources shouldn't have to have a domain configured to get code interfaces on them, then we can fix it basically the other way, where now you don't have to specify a domain. That would be fine with me. Will says, if I already have an OpenAPI spec powered by a TypeScript Express app that I'd like to experiment replacing with Ash, do you have any insight on how to customize the JSON API responses to match? I will say, yeah, go ahead.
The first question is, does the existing app, does it use the JSON API standard? And if so, they should be hopefully similar in the way you can tease them together. But remember that Ash JSON API is not Ash generic REST JSON based API. It is specifically Ash JSON API, the spec. So tuning the responses is a bit more difficult there. Now, whether there should be an Ash _generic _REST _JSON _API package is certainly something we could look at.
Yeah, I mean, you can make, actually, this is relatively recent, last couple months, I think, that we sort of locked in the last little bit you needed to make this happen, but you can do essentially arbitrary REST with Ash JSON API now, because we like let you step outside of the conventions with generic actions, where you can just say like, this is a route that serves the results of this generic action. It's just not even remotely as, like, if you have to do it all with generic actions, all of everything to get a specific response and shape and all that sort of stuff, it's like, are you really getting much? I mean, I guess you are. You get some nice things. You get all your policies and all that sort of stuff, but it's like you're just mostly defining an action per endpoint, etc. And I would just want to remind everybody that there's nothing wrong with writing old school Phoenix controllers, like, that accept a request from a JSON API. I mean, like, I wouldn't do that if I was just making a brand new API. But if I had to conform to an existing API specification, what I would almost certainly do is make an old school Phoenix controller that accepts JSON, passes that JSON into a Ash resource action, and then serializes the response in some particular way. So you get all the benefits of everything in Ash below the fold of the API, and then you'll as you do that, you spot maybe some patterns, some things that you can sort of extract and that'll help you out. But it's meant to be like you don't have to use an API extension to write APIs with Ash. You could use regular GraphQL with Absinthe or regular Phoenix REST patterns. And sometimes you have to. Like if you're designing to a very strict spec, sometimes you just have to do that. And I think that's a feature, not a bug, right? That like the API extensions we offer are very opinionated to get you really far, really fast. And then if it's not what you need, then you have all of Phoenix to do regular Phoenix-y stuff, which is super flexible unless you do anything you want. It's a bit handwritten based on how we were feeling each day. Welcome to apps built without Ash. Yeah, sounds about right. Okay, we're an hour in, and I am sick, and I'm starting to sweat through my clothes. Oh,
there's one question you skipped over, which is lots of talk about wrapping external APIs with Ash resources. One way was to use manual actions for the stuff. Is there more documentation example about writing a custom data layer? You, my friend, are in for a world of pain. I'm sorry.
I don't know. It's interesting. People have done it. It's not that bad. But it is not. It is not for the.
It's pretty bad.
Not for the intrepid. No, it's the other way around. For the intrepid. What does intrepid mean? Is that
not for the faint of heart?
Not for the faint of heart. Whatever. Yes, thank you. So one thing I would want to be 100% clear is, data layers are when you should write a data layer is when you can imagine storing any general kind of thing in this data layer, right? So like, could I like run through a couple types of things like a post, a user, a movie, a blog? I don't know. Like, could you store any of those things in this data layer? If so, then you have a good case for a data layer. So you think of like SQL databases, NoSQL databases, graph databases. You can store sort of any type of data in those databases. They just have different properties about how they all interact. But if you're thinking about like an API, like a specified API, like the GitHub API, right? There's a bunch of different endpoints, right? That data layer under the hood is going to have to be switching on the type of thing, like the resource that's accessing it, and doing different things. Like, so if it's your tickets resource, it's going to go to the tickets API, right? And if it's your, I don't know, if it's your issues, if it's your repositories resource, it's going to go to the repositories API, right? You're looking for like a different abstraction for when you're wrapping APIs in general. And so we look at, there's an exception to this. There's a thing called AshJSON API, experimental. You can go find it. It proposes a way for us to have a generic API mapper thing. But it hasn't seen the light of the day because Ash has all the tools, like James was talking about, generic actions or manual actions, generic actions, and all these sorts of things. And then you just use rec to call an API, and you've cut out like a bunch of the mental overhead of the process of figuring out a way to go from specific to generic to specific again, right? Which is what you'd be doing, building an API wrapping data layer. So that's my thought, is you probably don't want to use data layers for that.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, hey, we had best attendance we've had so far. I think 21 people at the peak or something along those lines. So that's nice. We're famous. Y'all are famous. Welcome to it. I'm going to go sleep for 12 hours now. All right.
All right.
Bye, everybody.